everyone. Welcome to our webinar on stakeholder engagement in ESG. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today and giving us your valuable time. I am Simoni Rathod from Lodha & Company ESG Practice. Lodha & Company is an 80-year-old audit and assurance firm with 6 offices all over the country. Today, we will be discussing the concept of stakeholders, the process of identification and engagement with the stakeholders for ESG integration, and various engagement approaches undertaken by the companies. The purpose of the webinar is purely for educational purpose. Any kind of compliance-related decision shall be referred to a professional advisor. Participants are requested to stay on mute at all times during the session. There will be a Q&A round at the end of the session where participants can ask their questions. The recorded version of the webinar shall also be made available on our YouTube page for future references, the link of which will be available in our chat box. Nowadays, the most important question that every sustainability officer or a sustainability department is facing that how to prioritize different ESG practices in a way that makes sense to their organization. Defining an ESG strategy can be a complex exercise, but asking the stakeholders what matters to them can help the organizations manage that complexity and create a strategy that is responsive to the stakeholders' priorities and concerns, and therefore helps them to drive business performance. Moving on, let's understand who are stakeholders. The National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct, as issued by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, define stakeholder as an individual or group concerned or interested with or impacted by the activities of the businesses and vice versa, now or in the future. Typically, the stakeholders of a business include, but are not limited to, investors or shareholders, the employees and their families, the customers, the communities, the value chain members and other business partners, the regulators, civil society actors, and media. As per the Global Reporting Initiative, stakeholders are defined as entities or individuals that can be reasonably be expected to be significantly affected by the reporting organization's activities, products, or services, or whose actions can reasonably be expected to affect the ability of the organization to implement its strategies or achieve its objectives. The stakeholders are categorized into internal and external stakeholders. Now, internal stakeholders are within the organizations. The actions of the entity directly impact these stakeholders. These are the employees, the managers, the owners, the board of directors, the investors. Whereas there are external stakeholders which are outside the organization. The actions of the entity has an indirect impact on these kind of stakeholders. They are influenced by the organization's work. These are the society, the government, creditors, shareholders, customers, suppliers. Now, I will pass on the virtual flow to Mr. Manishankar Prasad, who will take the conversation ahead. Mr. Manishankar Prasad has 14 years of experience in environmental and social consulting from across various countries in Asia and Africa. He is currently the Vice President of ESG Practice, Lodha & Company.
Hi, afternoon, evening, and morning from wherever you're joining from. And I pretty much thank you all for your time this hour for spending with us. And many thanks for the virtual flow, Simoni, as well. Wonderful introduction. I would like to take the presentation forward by speaking about something about stakeholders itself. Why are stakeholders important? Stakeholders are often people who have a direct or indirect influence on a person's business, right? And we are talking about it from a context of ESG. Why is it important to us? It's important because ESG is a complex system. ESG has many stakeholders, which indirectly or directly impact each other. Outcomes and results are purely dependent upon relationships of power and influence between these stakeholders. Often stakeholder engagement is treated as a very soft aspect within the ESG fold, uh, because it's not quantitative, right? How do you qualify a relationship between a company and a community, or between internal stakeholders like employees, for example, or investors who are interested in knowing the quality of information? First of all, I would like to begin off by speaking about stakeholder engagement purely from a practitioner's perspective. I've done stakeholder engagement as a part of being a social impact assessment practitioner for the past 15 odd years. And one thing which I have typically found is whatever our plans are, right? At the end of the day, ESG is a change management process. We have to move from point A to point B in terms of a journey. And often what happens is stakeholder engagement is often a footnote in a sustainability report, in an annual sustainability report, right? Uh, Stakeholders are important to be mapped. Stakeholder engagement is officially done in large organizations or in large projects, because you have to understand who is the important actor in your ecosystem, right? Ultimately, ESG is a matter of ecosystem. We are moving towards a climate positive world or a nature positive world, right? So what we need to understand over here is two fundamental concepts over here. We need to understand our power, we need to understand our culture, we need to understand our influence. So why is power important? Power is important to move the needle from point A to point B, right? It's a change management process. We need to talk about culture as well. Culture is very important to stakeholder engagement, because if there is no culture of inclusivity, of dialogue, then what happens is, uh, if there is something to be flagged off, or if there is some feedback loop over there in terms of moving the entire paradigm forward regarding ESG in your organization, that really does not happen. So having communication channels open, informal, formal grievance redressal mechanisms are fundamental and very, very important. So it's power, culture, and influence. Influence, because a lot of times there are indirect stakeholders who have inordinate degree of impact on the outcomes. So so that is extremely valuable as well, in terms of understanding these three important concepts. Stakeholder engagement is done to basically actualize outcomes, right? Whatever your ESG outcomes are, there needs to be a mechanism in order to create the social capital, in order to create that buy-in regarding sustainability goals. And it's important because the stakeholders are accountable for their performance, for their actions, and stakeholders is about building their common platform, building their common trust within the organization. According to the NGRBC is the National Guidelines for Responsible Business Conduct. It says that stakeholder engagement is about recognizing that all stakeholders play a crucial role in a business's success. The top management must map out the stakeholders and proactively engage and build strong relationships on a consistent and continuous basis. These are very important keywords over here: consistent and continuous. How do you make it? How do you make it continuous? Because there has to be a stakeholder management plan in which it is to be written down as per how much information has to be communicated at various intervals to X, Y, and Z stakeholder. So if I'm tomorrow carrying out change mapping assignment within an organization, trying to understand that what are our strategic priorities regarding sustainability, trying to create a roadmap. So I need to understand who will be my primary stakeholders in terms of influence, right? Whether it is my investment, whether it is my investment makers, whether it is my consumers, whether it is my internal employees, whether it is my board. These are all stakeholders, right? But they have to be communicated certain packets or parcels of information from time to time. And that's what about consistent and continuous is mentioned. And stakeholder engagement is important because these organizations are large and global in nature. These organizations have thousands of employees, have hundreds of locations where they're based out of. They have hundreds of thousands of assets. So how do you engage all of these communities in which there's something called as a social license to operate? Businesses need to have a social license to operate in order to make sure that their sustainability outcomes are in fact done in terms of in a responsible manner, right? We live in the era of responsible capitalism after all. So we need to understand how do we actualize these outcomes by making sure that our actors, stakeholders are having a right amount of buy-in or the social license to operate. So of course, stakeholder engagement has to be an inclusive process throughout the entire life cycle of any project or a change mapping exercise at regular intervals. May I have the next slide, please? Yeah, absolutely. What is the need for stakeholder identification and engagement? Usually we do a stakeholder engagement exercise or a plan as a part of materiality assessment. And materiality assessment is step one. If you've seen through our previous webinar on materiality assessment, it is shown that often the materiality assessment is a starting point of an ESG management journey. It's a part of a reporting journey regarding ESG, right? You have to help identify or determine material issues for sustainability reporting, right? How do you do that? You have to bring together your stakeholders in a virtual room or in a physical room, even better, have a town hall meeting, have focus group discussions in order to thrash out, identify what are the key aspects, right? For example, if you're a bank, what are the key material aspects? Your material aspects are whom are you lending your dollars to? Ultimately, who are your customers? Who are your borrowers? Who are your creditors? You need to understand about data. You need to understand privacy because it's about technology nowadays. So reputation. These are the material issues which are there for a retail bank, right? At the end of the day. So if we map out these material exercises through a stakeholder identification and engagement exercise, we bring together a better understanding of risk and reputation. And what happens is we understand who as a part of our ESG stakeholder ecosystem within the organization and within the communities of practice, who will be important to move the needle, to move the conversation forward, right? Who are the key actors and who are the actors who can be supporting in the journey rather than being on the front line. As I mentioned, ESG is a complex system. It's about plurality. It's open source software. At the end of the day, there are new topics, there are new issues emerging, engaging every single day, which happen, right? So these are complex operating environments, and ESG is about business at the end of the day. It's about creating business value, retaining business value, and also risk mitigation. So what happens is if we engage all the stakeholders in an equitable manner, in an inclusive manner, what really happens is a lot of communities downstream, right? Who are essentially your neighbors, these are essential communities who are around your operating facilities. They feel they have an opportunity to have a dialogue, to have a conversation with the community, which is often rare. And these are important in resource extractive industries like mining or power or oil and gas, where communities in and around your allocation blocks or your oil exploration blocks or your mineral exploration blocks are fundamental and important. A very important part of the stakeholder journey is how do you learn? It's a feedback loop at the end of the day. You need to engage your actors, you need to engage the people who are buying your product or receiving services or contributing towards your product and process, right? So it's a learning and feedback loop. So that's what stakeholder engagement is about. It's also an opportunity to inform, educate, and engage stakeholders in a way that your corporate decision making is better. At the end of the day, I would like to repeat that the relationships it's about transparency, it is about trust. And that lies at the very heart or at the very core of stakeholder engagement. May I have the next slide, please? So, so how do you do the entire process, right? A successful engagement depends upon why the organization is doing stakeholder engagement in the first case, right? Which is the scope. What is the scope of the engagement? First of all, you need to have a purpose. Why it is engaging with all the stakeholders, right? Because it's an expensive, it's a resource-intensive exercise. The scope of the engagement is basically done to understand what is the outcome of the stakeholder engagement process. For example, a very good example of stakeholder engagement is materiality mapping, right? So it has to be done by geography, it has to be done by division, it has to be done by product, in order to understand what is the macro level, asset level, organization level, risk and opportunities regarding your business. And that can only be done by a comprehensive, inclusive stakeholder management process. Who manages the process? Who owns the process? Basically, these are important leaders within the organization, important leaders within your team, who basically take the mandate of taking the baton from upwards in the organization and engaging individual teams to take the feedback through focus group discussions, through interviews, and in terms of gathering all the input and taking it forward in town halls or bigger engagements when it is needed, right? Because these organizations are sometimes multi-thousand, hundreds of thousands of workers, in which stakeholder engagement really becomes like a becomes almost like a society as a whole approach, honestly speaking. And important stakeholders are there who have an influence on the process, right? For example, if you're talking about ESG, ESG is about business value creation, right? So it has to create value for your investors. It has to create for your value for your customers, ultimately, right? So we need to understand the dependency, responsibility, tension, influence, and diverse perspectives of the stakeholders in your business, right? So stakeholder management engagement has a science behind it. You need to understand the degree of the relationship between the actors, the dynamics between the actors, the power relationships between the actors. And this is very, very important because ultimately we are all human. These are all communities which have their own dynamics, which have their own group dynamics, which are inflected, reflected through a societal lens, right? For example, who has the power within the organization, who has influence within the organization, and who can basically disrupt or basically sabotage an entire project, or basically move a completely different agenda forward, right? Concerning ESG or sustainability, right, or climate action. Next slide, please. So the stakeholder engagement process, as I mentioned, is pretty simple on paper. Of course, the complexity will differ upon the number of actors, the geographies, the region engaged in the process. So basically, create a stakeholder management plan. Create a management plan in which you decide what is the objective of this organization as a whole process. Why do you need the process for? What are the timelines? What are the impact activities? What are the resources needed? How do you do monitoring and evaluation? How do you create productivity metrics out of it, right? How do you make sure that there is enough resources to engage this into a document so that it has extreme validity in terms of creating your stakeholder engagement or ESG strategy later on, right? So you prepare the plan, you implement the plan through various events, right? Virtual, in-person, focus group, interviews, town hall meetings. Make sure that you have a good facilitator as a consultant, or somebody who has got an extreme sense of culture, group dynamics. These are softer side of the story, right? But these are important in order to draw out the right amount of tension, the right amount of feedback, the right amount of information which is needed ultimately for your process, right? And what really happens with the stakeholder engagement process is that sometimes you come out with perspectives which you wouldn't know normally in a usual conversation in a canteen, right? So, so what you essentially do is you act, you implement, you prepare, and you iterate. And often a stakeholder engagement plan of an organization is a live document which needs to be updated periodically. Can I have the next slide, please? So the stakeholder management plan is pretty straightforward. You profile and map stakeholders who will be the influencers, so-called, in the organization. You determine the engagement levels and what are the methods you would like to engage with them on a periodic basis. And then you establish how do you draw the boundaries of disclosure, which community or practice or stakeholder needs a particular set of information regarding the others. And this draft engagement plan is which documents the process, right? The engagement process overall, the purpose, the scope, the owners of the engagement, who are the key actors, their roles and responsibilities, and of course the resources required, right? So it is an entire engagement. It is a organization as a whole activity, right? Which is a strategic activity in a way which is not really taken very seriously because it is a soft activity. But these are the soft activities which actually determine whether a particular sustainability strategy progresses or it stumbles, honestly speaking. A very important part of the stakeholder engagement plan is you establish a good monitoring and evaluation indicator system, the key performance indicators to establish how do you measure the success of a stakeholder engagement strategy, right? A plan, a process. What kind of data are you looking at? What kind of engagement levels are you looking at? Are you looking at some kind of alignment, some kind of development of social capital? What are the methods are you looking at to measure, engage, have this critical conversation? Usually, stakeholder engagement strategies or plans are documents which are purely for an academic purpose, but there are ways to use this process into turning into a meaningful exercise in terms of creating a society-wide or a community-wide buy-in for your plans, for your sustainability or climate action plans. Next slide, please. So, so basically, when the rubber meets the road, you need to mobilize resources. You need to mobilize resources in terms of training, resources, financial resources, manpower. You need event spaces. You need food. You need facilitators. You need good consultants who would come in and engage a complete town hall of 300 people, for example. Or for example, your skill sets which are required to facilitate a focus group discussion versus an unstructured interview versus a town hall versus a virtual interaction is completely different, right? So these are skill levels through qualitative methods which can be developed, learned, and also procured through third-party services. It's very important to upskill your teams regarding how to properly use the stakeholder engagement process in terms of building the kind of social capital which you need ultimately. So it involves a lot of training, it involves a lot of time, organizational time. Usually in such exercises, organizational time is at the premium, right? So when do you make sure that you have a town hall? When do you make sure that you have this discussion? Usually this is not a post Friday lunch activity, right? It has to be held at points of time during the week in which everybody has a common space, but everybody also values this engagement in which you build relationships through the process as well. So these are engagement risks are of course there. There might be people who are unwilling to engage as a whole, and basically creating expectations of change that the organization is unwilling or unable to fulfill is a major impediment, right? So there's a problem of a hype and then stakeholders feel disappointed. Sometimes time is wasted. Sometimes resources are not provided. It's only a tick box exercise. So to make sure that it's not only an academic exercise, but it makes a difference uh, for some tangible, meaningful end. Next slide, please. So, so in order to implement a stakeholder engagement process, right, you have to invite them in an inviting manner. We have to invite them in a calm, in a humble, in a very, very encouraging manner. You have to brief the stakeholders before the meetings, right? You have to send them a note. You have to send them sometimes a video or voice note in terms of understanding what are the ground rules for the engagement, right? Is it are these introductions recorded? Are they not recorded? Are notes taken? Is there a way that some controversial feedback can be articulated without any fear of reprisal? So these are some of the important issues which needs to be basically understood. It's a part of the culture, right? As I mentioned to you at the very beginning of this presentation, that we need to understand the culture is also very important, because in some organizations it's very hierarchical, it's very top down. So a lot of communities, a lot of stakeholders might be hesitant to freely articulate what they really feel. It's very important to document the engagement through the integrities and through the fine print, essentially. So there has to be a consultant or a community relations manager within the organization who has to record in audio, video, textual, verbatim format in terms of facilitating this workshop. These kind of the outcomes of these engagement might be webs, might be mind maps, might be transcripts. They also might be video recordings. There might be performances in nature. So these can be all kinds of raw material, raw data might be produced out of the process, right? Which essentially can be formatted, cleaned up into a report in which there might be recommendations, some follow-up actions, some monitoring plans in place, and also very importantly, usually an outcome of stakeholder engagement process is an action plan, right? What have you decided? What is the feedback towards? Usually we are talking about an engagement towards materiality and towards the ESG management strategy, right? So what is your climate action plan of an organization? So how do you build an action plan? How do you do the consultation, and how do you follow up? So equally important is to make sure that the stakeholders who have participated in the process are apprised of the follow-up measures and what is happening with them. It's very important to build continuous trust in the process. So, and trust is everything. The reason why you talk to people in such a huge exercise is to create organization-wide trust. Next slide, please. So these are some of the examples of major companies who have done stakeholder engagement in a meaningful manner. So the format is pretty straightforward, right? So these might be customers, these are employees, these are investors, authorities, and civil society, right? And so this stakeholder engagement format is pretty straightforward, right? So the customers are, of course, very, very important. So these might be engagement channels, might be through advertising, through communication, through consumer forums, to groups, right, with customers. With employees, it might be surveys or messengers or Slack channels. With investors, it might be board meetings, investor surveys, any kind of industry level dialogue. With authorities, of course, it might be written communication, right? For example, industry associations, or for example, structured dialogues in nature. Civil societies, of course, through engagement, uh, through civil society and business platforms, right? Where businesses and civil society meet. There also might be engagements which are one-to-one in nature. Next one, please. So CIPLA has a very extensive stakeholder engagement plan. In fact, uh, uh, they have also outlined the engagement boards and the frequency as well. So what I found very interesting is how do they communicate with various stakeholders, for example, through event-based channels, or for example, through periodic interactions, right? Uh, very important is patients, for example. How do they communicate, right? They communicate through continuous, periodic, as well as event-based channels, right? For example, with doctors, with hospitals, uh, and it's a very complex pharmaceutical medical regulation is a very complex ecosystem in place, right? With numerous number of actors, with communities, with healthcare professionals, with institutional partners, with employees. So it is a very dynamic process, and it is fascinating to see how very complex actors such as the pharmaceutical majors such as CIPLA engages the entire ecosystem almost like a symphony in an orchestra, and it's beautiful. And it's something to be learned from pharmaceutical companies as well, because they are heavily regulated, and they're heavily monitored industries as well. Next one, please. Vedanta, for example, is a mining company, right? It has come into the news for various reasons in the recent past, but it's very important to know that many of these mining industries are in fragile conflict areas. So the engagement model is also very sensitive in nature. So they need to ask why the dialogue is important. They need to provide a reason for the dialogue. They need to analyze any form of complaints, for example, through whistleblowing mechanisms, or for example, or any grievance redressal mechanism as well. And they need to also align with stakeholder, or for example, regulatory compliance issues, both at the international level as well as the national level, right? And what's very important for such sensitive industries is they need to follow up on that action as well, and that needs to be communicated back to the communities, rather than a stakeholder engagement plan being a part of a environmental impact assessment report, which is really not engaged or followed up with the ESAP, right? With the environmental and social action plan or the mitigation plan in place, which is textual rather than implemented in letter and spirit. Next one, please. So what really happens with Vedanta is that it's multi-level, it's multi-layered, right? So it happens at the group level. There are local expectations as well. A very important part of a stakeholder engagement channel for mining and resource extractive industries is uh, they need the feedback mechanisms at every step of the project life cycle. Their engagement modes, their frequency for every stakeholder. They need to disclose information as well. And of course, the follow-up measures are of course there, but the complexity is very enormous, because these industries operate in very sensitive conflict-linked areas in parts of the world in which nobody law and order is not the best. Next one, please. So this is very interesting over here. DBS Bank from Singapore has come out with their with the sustainability report yesterday, and lo and behold, before the materiality assessment, on page 10 of the report, there is actually a stakeholder engagement map being provided between investors, customers, employees, society, and regulators, which is a very impressive kind of boiling down in terms of how they actually implement the stakeholder engagement, right? For every stakeholder group, they have different mechanisms, they have different ways in which they have done outreach in a systematic manner, connecting their stakeholder engagement to materiality and also to the larger GRI and other frameworks in place, which is a very impressive exercise. So here is where we can see that stakeholder engagement is a very important part of the ESG reporting journey, and it's at the cornerstone of building social capital and trust towards doing something meaningful as a corporate actor. Uh, so this is a wonderful exercise, and and big organizations which are publicly listed, which are GRI aligned, normally do stakeholder engagement in a very comprehensive manner. Next slide, please. So there are a few thumb rules regarding quality stakeholder engagement. Uh, there has to be a clear scope definition. Why are you doing this engagement for? Secondly, there has to be structured decision-making process. Thirdly, materiality, and only materiality. What is material for your organization will matter in the long term. Create this voice architectures for dialogue. Create these openings for communities and stakeholders of all sorts, right? To speak to important actors, because usually the Chinese whisper is very dangerous. Be integral to organizational governance. Are these feedback channels, are these communication channels important to your governance mechanisms? Be transparent, have trust, be timely, have a process which is appropriate to your business. Be adaptive, be agile, be flexible, and of course, be meaningful and add value to your organization and stakeholders. Next one. So over here, I conclude my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. I would take this opportunity to encourage the participants over here to pop in the questions in the chat box, or to raise their hands and simply unmute and ask particular questions. At this juncture, I would like to encourage you to participate in a small poll as well, which is popped up on your screen on stakeholder engagement. Thank you so much. So if you participate in the poll, I would encourage you to think through particular questions, pop it in the chat box, and also let's engage in a conversation and in a dialogue at this particular juncture. I would like to pass back the virtual screen to Simone for facilitating this conversation. Okay, we have the results for the poll out. Okay, interesting results. Thank you so much for your participation. So I could see a probe which has popped up in the chat box. Thank you, Abhijit, for your appreciation. I can see Rushti's question in the chat box. I would like to read it out. If any entity has not conducted stakeholder assessment, should they consider it as a material topic, since it is important aspect of ESG? Well, you can't do a materiality assessment without doing a stakeholder engagement, because in order to understand what is material to your business in terms of risk and opportunities, you need to understand who your actors are, who are your main players, how they what they feel is important and what not they feel is important, right? It has to be an exercise which is inclusive in nature, if not democratic. So I think so. A precursor to a materiality assessment, which is a precursor to the ESG process, is stakeholder engagement, which is often a footnote, but it has to be blown out, amplified, and placed in bold and italic for people to understand. I hope I answered your question, Vishnu. Yeah. Absolutely. Abhijit, if you can unmute and share your perspective on stakeholder engagement, that would be lovely. Are you able to unmute, Abhijit? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you so much, Abhijit. Please share.
Hi, Manishankar. Hi,
Yeah.
everyone. So currently, I'm working in Cube Highways. So we basically operate toll operations in India. There are multiple roads that we operate in different sectors. So been working here from past 5 years. So your webinar and your insights are quite relatable to what we do here as well. So we have a stakeholder engagement program, properly defined as per IFC guidelines and everything. And over the period of time, we made some mistakes. We learned, because when you go to a community, they have their certain aspects, right? Do this, do that, and we have a certain mind frame that we cannot do that. Obviously, there are various stakeholders as well. Like this is one example of community. And then when you operate a road, then you tend to see the changes in the regions. You tend to see the change in the mentality of the people. You have to understand each and every aspect of stakeholder engagement prior to reach to the community administration, or making any plan. So what I want to say basically is to whenever anyone makes their stakeholder engagement plan, the obvious thing, the main priority is to understand what you can do for them. What is the what the community wants. Who are your stakeholders? Do proper mapping of the road, of your areas, of your neighbor, your community. Then sit with your team and then make the plan. So we do CSR activities, CDP activities, and it varies from region to region. So in North India, we do some specific activities for some specific communities. In South India, we do various things for other stakeholders. So it's quite a challenging thing as well, but it's a beautiful experience to get the approval from your stakeholders. It's a big thing when you are working in an open boundary. Like we don't have any boundary of our workspace. So a road starts from somewhere and somewhere. There are IPS officers, there are various stakeholders. So many things we are facing. But the beautiful thing is, if you are well versed, if you are knowledgeable, you have certain experience, you have support of your management, you are able to convince each and everyone who are discussing the things with, then it's a beautiful experience, and it really does help the stakeholders. They come to you for their requirements. If they generally have some, then they share their things, their experiences, their requests, and then you can do a better job in the engagement process. So that's all I want to say. And really, it's been a fantastic experience. I relived the last 5 years in the last 1 hour of your webinar. So thank you so much, Dada.
For sharing your lived experiences of delivering a stakeholder management plan. And it's very, very valuable. Often we do a lot of stakeholder management, which is on paper, right? But what happens actually on the ground with communities of practice, communities of engagement is significant. To be honest with you, it's something which is really very, very valuable in creating the social buy-in. If I'm allowed to ask you a question, Abhijit, in your experience, how has the stakeholder engagement strategy or a plan help you to create trust in a community or in the project in terms of delivering your infrastructure or road project in a better manner? If I'm allowed to ask you that.
Yes, I can briefly touch on that topic. So basically, in earlier stage, we because we have project heads on the road. Earlier, in unit stage, people just used to go in the village, they discuss what are the requirements and all. They come back, this is the requirement. People used to fulfill that. But then we prepared a proper plan. What are their actual requirements? Are they asking for some favors or something? No, there is always a middleman in the community. Oh, I can get this done. You include me and do this favor to me. So we in India, you get to see these things. But basically, you have to engage with the like panchayat head, the members, the communities. You have to properly communicate your requirements. Okay, you have to properly understand their requirements and then come to a common platform. So, for example, we have free tailoring centers almost all over India for the women. So all the machines are provided by us. The space is provided by the panchayat, and the security cameras are there. 24/7 feed is there. I personally check 24/7 on our system here in Noida and Hyderabad. So we keep recording, keep checking each and everything. So then, with such activities, the trust builds. So they are genuinely here to work. They are genuinely here to work and to help us to engage with us. So over a period of time, when you keep knocking on the door, then the trust builds. It's not a one-time activity, but if you are transparent, if you come to their level, come to a common platform, then only the trust can build. But it's not like you go and give some order and they get it done. It's not like that.
That's fascinating as an example of how to create trust in the community, and in first trying to deliver what is needed in the community first, right? And taking it as a journey, taking it as a process. And thank you for the beautiful sharing, Abhijit. Really appreciate for your candid inputs and for your participation as well. We're grateful for that. So there are two more questions in the chat box which I would like to take. This one is from Mr. Deepak Kumar, who has written in the chat box, how is materiality assessment different from different reporting standards? Basically, materiality assessment basis is the same, right? It's about identifying risk and opportunities. GRI is a double materiality, right? So when we talk about materiality and double materiality, GRI is a gold standard. When we talk about impact materiality, environmental and social impact, GRI is indeed the benchmark because it talks about double materiality. TCFD is, of course, for climate reporting, and it talks about climate scenario analysis, and in terms of physical transition risk, and in terms of liability risk, and it basically talks about climate risk, right? So TCFD is a different thing. TCFD and materiality are not very, very related. It is tangentially related in the sense that it talks about physical risk, which is material in nature. Stranded assets, for example, is material. SASB is, of course, SASB is very, very detailed. It's part of the Value Reporting Foundation now, and it comes up with these beautiful indicators from industry to industry, and it brings into perspective what are the risks and opportunities. So in a way, SASB is deeply rooted in materiality as GRI as well. So I hope I have addressed whatever was asked of me, Mr. Deepak Kumar. Thank you very much for your question. I would like to take Akshata's point next. What are the different challenges faced during stakeholder engagement, as there are various different stakeholders? Are there specific standards for following for addressing these challenges? Well, basic answer is challenges are plenty, right? People talk to you, or even if they talk to you, they won't talk to you candidly. Even if they talk to you, they won't talk on camera, right, or talk on the recorder. So these are the basic challenges which are faced, right? And even if they talk, right, in a secure manner, there is no guarantee that it will be translated onto the report, and there will be some transmission loss in whatever they say. So there are practical, feasible challenges at every step of the stakeholder engagement process, because it is subjective, it's perceptional in nature. Are there any specific standards followed for addressing these challenges? Unfortunately, there are no standards, but International Financial Corporation (IFC) has got, according to IFC Principle 2, Performance Standard 2, there are best practices for stakeholder engagement as well. So stakeholder engagement is a broad topic. It's participatory in nature. It talks about various issues, and stakeholder engagement. The contours of stakeholder engagement shift, vary, mutate across geographies, across organization, and it depends upon what is your intervention area all about. Basically, what do you want to drive at? So at this juncture, if there are no more questions, I will pass on the virtual floor back to Simone in order to conclude this presentation today. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to you joining us on subsequent webinars, including one which is next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for giving us your valuable time and in-depth insights on effective stakeholder engagement strategy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today and giving us your valuable time. We hope this session was insightful. We would appreciate your feedback at the end of the webinar. We also look forward to your participation in all our upcoming webinars. Thank you so much.